Anonymity on the internet is very hard, and it is impossible to get it 100% right, but there are steps we can do to be very, very, very good, very, very, very close. Tails is one of the best ways, and the new version of Tails is coming out soon, so we're going to go ahead and talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to jump in and have a brief look at it. So with this video, we are going to dive on in and see what is coming in Tails 6.0. Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Thanks for coming along. And today we are going to have a look at 6.0. We're going to talk a little bit about what Tails is, and then we're going to get into what the changes are, and then we're going to actually go look at it and see some of those changes live in the distribution itself. Of course, Tails is a live operating system, which means you do not install it onto the hard drive on your computer. Instead, you install it onto a USB drive, usually as a immutable image on the drive, and then it has tools and applications to use the rest of that USB drive in what is called a persistent storage. And they have a really good, robust tool set that allows you to save not only files, but install extra applications, save some configuration files, and a few other nuanced things that you might want in a long-term install, but they are still separate from the operating system itself, meaning you can still pull the operating system up as a complete raw virgin system without any of the other factors embedded inside of it. This itself is very good for having an operating system that is, on one hand, immutable and highly secure and very anonymous, while maintaining some degree of control over your files. Now, other systems that are similar to this, of course, you can use the Tor browser bundle on Windows, Mac, or Linux. You can get that available, which does a decent job of doing this. And Unix is the best one that you want to use for a virtual machine system. So inside of if you have a big enough system to run a virtualization, you get Unix. It installs two machines. One is a network stack based on the Tor network stack, the Onion router, and then the other one is a workstation. This allows you to save a little bit of things. And then, of course, there is Cubes, which we also have a number of tutorials on, which is the best to install fully onto a full operating system. So, full operating system, you want to go with Cubes. If you're doing a virtual machine system, like you want to maintain your Windows or your Mac or your Linux, but have one separate location on that machine for such type of work, you want to use Unix. And then, of course, if you're going portable, you want to use Tails. Of all of them, I think Tails does the best overall job because it works with its anonymity model by manipulating all of the fingerprinting information to make it look like everybody using Tails looks like the same person on the internet. And that goes a long way. Of course, that's also the logic behind the Malved browser, how that works with privacy. And the Tor browser bundle does something very similar. Of course, nothing is perfect. Keep that in mind. And of course, never use anything in anonymity stuff for trying to break the law, because once you have a target on you, you are going to be de-anonymized. But as far as just getting out and looking up that weird foot fungus you got or whatever else you're trying to do, maybe you're looking up dog food without wanting to see dog food ads for all eternity, hey, Tails is a great place to do that. Now, this manages to achieve this by using a RAM-based system, including all of the data from the Tor browser is downloaded into a space on the RAM, not downloaded onto a disk itself, which itself is a fascinating thing. Although more modern versions, and I forget exactly which branch it was, maybe it was 517 or something, actually gave you now one spot on your persistent drive, which allows you to download stuff directly to that as well, although it can't download to anything else outside of there. So that's how it does a really good job. So this means that once you shut it down, it doesn't remember anything from the previous install. No, there is nothing to link it back. Even the MAC address is going to change due to their MAC address anonymizer. So it does have some good software pre-installed. We have LibreOffice, we have Thunderbird, we have Onion Share. We have the Electron crypto wallet, just a lot of different features. And all of these features pre-installed are configured to not allow the applications to work outside of the Tor network. Any attempt to go outside of the Tor network, the application shuts down. This is why it is not recommended to install software external to what they've pre-installed without taking some extra security precautions. But nevertheless, you get a really good system. And then finally, of course, it works by making, we already mentioned, it works by making all users look the same. Now, the next version of Tails, which is the first one based on Debian 12 and GNOME 43, is set to release on February 27th. And they are looking at the release candidate stuff coming on it now. So what we're going to do here, let's just walk really briefly through what is changed, and then we're going to go into Tails. I'll talk a little bit about how I built the drive that we're looking at and what our system is going to be. Originally, I was just going to download the virtual machine version and look at that, but really a lot of Tails is tied to that persistent drive. So I did want to go ahead and install it onto my test Tails system, and then that'll get us to see where we're at. So I'll get into that in a brief minute. So first, of course, new features. It will automatically mount devices. This is good for most people. A few people probably won't like that, but it does at least once you plug something in. You used to have to go into your computer and then find the device and then click it to mount it. I think that was probably a little bit better for security, but if you're using external devices with Tails, it was really a pain. So I can understand why they did that. Of course, they blocked that if your screen is locked. So if your screen is locked, you would have to go in and still use the old way. Thanks to GNOME 43, we now have our light mode, our dark mode, and then we have the night light modes. One for the light and one for the dark, so allegedly easier on the eyes. So those are new options that you have. And we do have the new GNOME built-in screenshots and screencast options. Of course, limited, doesn't take any audio systems, but at least we can get the screen, and of course it does have Audacity, so if you want to record that. Now this is one of the warning things. I will mention the warning once again when we get into the system itself, but it does make using Gmail easier with Thunderbird. I will warn you though that once you're attaching something like a Facebook account or a Google account to something you're doing on the Tor network, you can effectively de-anonymize anything else you're doing in that session. So you want to be careful and only be attaching accounts that are otherwise anonymous to it, but that is something that you have as far as getting that installed. Adding your persistent volume, you now have a few more languages to automatically create the passphrases. So there's an option that if you want to have it suggest a passphrase or something, you can go ahead and do that. And then there's a few software application changes. You can see the one I'll point out here is Onion Share, as they mentioned down here in the known issues. There are a few issues with Onion Share 2.6. So right now they're not sure if we're going to get 2.6 or if they are going to keep the 2.2, mostly due to two major issues. Number one is it stays open in the background, which if you click to close it, it should close. And then of course this causes it to fail to reopen. And additionally, Onion Share will crash when stopping and restarting file shares. And that also is a problem. So unless they can get those resolved, we're going to be stuck on 2.2 versus 2.6. There are also issues with the new automatic device mounting. Completely crashes the Tails cloner and the backup persistent storage utilities. So don't plug in a USB drive with those unless, again, they have that resolved. I believe that we are past, I think up to February 18th, you could send information in about this. So I think we're past that date, but I did want to bring the information here. Now, as far as my build here, I thought that the lack of the automatic upgrade would mean that you have to wipe your persistent storage to install it. It turns out that's not the case. What I did is I used the Tails cloner. I booted it into the virtual machine system using the 6.0 RC1, and then I plugged in my Tails USB drive that I use for testing, which has persistent storage. I cloned it onto that disk. It actually installed Tails around my persistent storage perfectly fine. I was able to boot back up into the new version of Tails. My persistent storage is retained, with the sole exception I lost the ability to auto install packages, which I had there. So I had to shut that off, and I'll show you how I did that when we get into the system itself. So booting into our Tails, now this is a familiar screen if you've used Tails in the past. Of course, we can come over here and enter our passphrase for our persistent storage. And then the other settings down here have remained largely the same. So this is, you can turn on network administration password if you need to do anything network-like, installing software, things like that. Mac anonymization is enabled by default. You can turn it off if there's a reason to. You can enable or disable networking and enable or disable the unsafe browser. This is enabled by default. Network connection is still here, but it is obsolete, now covered under the offline mode. Of course, you can select all of your languages, and we can go ahead and start Tails now. Okay, once we have a network connection that it sees, whether you install that with a cable, as I'm doing in this instance here, or over the Wi-Fi, we're going to get this connect to Tor. You can either do automatically, or you can do hide to your local network that you are connecting to Tor. So these guys here, just choose whichever one. It's not important for the purpose of this review, where we're just having a brief look at some of the overarching changes. Now, of course, I did get my persistent storage on the upgrade. We are running this on a USB drive on the computer. And I thought that initially that we would not be able to keep our persistence upgrading from the 5X to the 6. But as long as you're using your upgrade inside of your Tails under your Tails cloner, it actually did enable me to run this. It basically installed the newer version of Tails around my persistent drive, keeping my persistent drive safe. The only thing I did lose is the ability to auto install new software on boot. And I basically just have to remove all those. I don't remember which software I used. This is a Tails drive I use just to test things before running a production install. So over here, we can clone the current. We can clone the current persistent storage as well. So if this one here has persistent storage, if I wanted to clone this and its persistent storage on another drive, I could do that. Or I could use a downloadable image if I happen to have one. And then here I'd select the USB stick. Of course, we don't have one installed right now. But hey, this new version, one of the new features is if you plug something in, it will automatically mount it as long as this screen is unlocked. So you can see that now it gives us the ability to target this particular device. And of course, you can see that it did give us the auto mount ability, so I can open this guy up and see what's on this drive if I wanted to. And I don't really need that, though. We'll go ahead and keep that drive plugged in. Here, we'll just go ahead and start the Tor browser here. I am noticing that my network can actually get on Tor if I'm on Tails, but it can't on Cubes without using a VPN. Maybe that's because Whonix is doing something different than Tails uses to get on the internet, but that is that. Now, as far as some of the other features, of course, we already talked about it, auto detects and mounts drives. This can be really good. It can cause a couple issues, but I'd say it solves more problems than it doesn't. We'll go ahead and do our Tor check, make sure we are running properly on Tor. And you can see it's configured. We have an IP address, and it tells us JavaScript is enabled. If you do need to disable JavaScript, the best way to do that is to change your security settings, go down to safest, and reboot this page, and you'll see that it'll go ahead, give us our Tor check, and now it tells us JavaScript is disabled. That's the best way to do that. We're just going to go ahead and, oh man, we've lost we used to have the minimization ability on this. This is why I'm not a huge fan of GNOME. See, GNOME. We have it over here, but we didn't on the browser. Oh well, we'll have to deal with that. And the other thing it is going to do, though, is if the screen is locked, it will not auto-mount anything, which is the old behavior. The old behavior, you'd plug something in, you'd have to go down to here, boot up computer, and then you'd have to manually boot things into your partition over here. That's perfectly fine. And as we said in the introduction, there's really nowhere that something from the internet can save to, with the sole exception of your Tor browser, which is stored to the memory, and this will be removed after this device is shut down. But we also have, as of a more recent version of 5X, like 5.18, 5.19, we also have this Tor browser persistent, which is the place on your persistent folder that your Tor browser can download. But note that your Tor browser cannot directly download to the persistent itself. You can see here that my files were preserved. Of course, I use this to look at that Facebook email scams to see what was going on there. So that's the files that were preserved over here. And I can make other changes as well. Of course, this version does have the ability to do a night light mode or the dark mode. These are all modes enabled for us. So if I were to pull these up now, you can see that we are in dark mode. Now, I was hoping that storing your dot files would keep your memory about whether or not I have Tails on dark mode on boot. It would appear it doesn't. So as of right now, you still have to go ahead and click the dark mode. That might be possible to save into your persistent drive, but I didn't see anything automatically available. Of course, we do now have in this version of GNOME, we have our GNOME screencaster, so we can either do a photograph or a video of a selection of screen or a window if we happen to have something open. So that is another of the new features. Now, some of the other new features that it tells us about, let me go ahead and get the Tor browser back open up here. So, of course, looking down at the features, the one we're talking about here is this one that allows easier Gmail on Thunderbird. I will give a little bit of a warning that once you're installing a Google account onto Tails, it de-anonymizes you. So if you're talking about a Gmail account that you use on regular ClearNet, and then you install that same Gmail account onto Thunderbird on Tails, that is a huge security risk. Of course, there are ways that you can run a Google account completely anonymously without tying your own real information. That would be the instance that you might want to do this. But just a warning, don't use the same Google account that you would use on Thunderbird here and also in a ClearNet, because it is possible then to de-anonymize, demask who you are. So I'm not a huge fan of that, but well, it is what it is. There are reasons to do that. We do also have some of the issues of mounting external devices can interfere with backing up the persistent storage or the Tails cloner. So anything that you're doing inside of your Tails persistent storage or Tails cloner, don't plug in an external USB drive when you are doing those. And that is certainly something that you want to keep in mind. Other brief observations, being as I use Tails a lot, the other brief observation I'm noticing here is that the version of this Tor browser actually has the anti-fingerprinting for the, if you maximize your browser. Usually you shouldn't do that because it can mask your screen resolution. In this case here, you'll see these gray boxes around it. This is actually something we saw by default enabled in the Mulved browser, which is no surprise that they would probably put that in this version here. This is an anti-fingerprinting feature that does allow you to maximize your Tor browser without demasking your screen resolution. So that's actually pretty good. All right, so other things here, there's no specific direct upgrade path from 5X to 6. Now, what that means is if you boot into Tails and once you get onto your network, it's going to check for updates. And then it'll give you the ability to click a button, download, and install the upgrade in place. That is not an option, and there's not likely to be any clear path to do that. So what you can do is you can do a manual upgrade. In my case, what I did is I used the Tails cloner. So what I ended up doing is just using this utility. I downloaded the RC1 for 6.0, installed it into a virtual machine, and then took this USB drive we're using, which was configured with persistent storage, and I plugged it in, and then I just cloned the current Tails into the drive, and it actually did that right around my persistent storage. As I said, my persistent storage remained perfectly fine, with the sole exception that I lost the ability to install applications. And what happened there is over here you'll see that it was giving me the error prompt, and then because this was turned on, But then if you clicked this button here, it gave you warnings that something was misconfigured. So I had to turn this off. And then once this was turned off, you can then delete the data. So I went ahead and did that, and that cleared everything. And now what I would have to do is just go back online and using Semantic Package Manager, install the software, and then that would save it if I wanted to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and keep the option off. And then there's the dot files for anything in your home folder you want to save over. It's probably possible to keep your light mode, dark mode enabled with that if you wanted to use that. I didn't look into that much further, so I'll wait to see if somebody else says anything about that. Of course, you can save your information like your Thunderbird email client, your Bitcoin wallet, your Tor browser bookmarks. You can save all of that into your persistent drive as well, and anything else that you might happen to need to do. So that's all useful information. Here is the persistent folder where you can save that. Here is your welcome screen and your printing settings. Let's go ahead and turn that on. No, let's turn that off. Okay. Let's delete data. And here's your network configuration. So if you're saving any passwords, or if you're using a specific Tor bridge, you want to save all that, you can save all of that inside of your persistent storage. So that is nice. Or you can, of course, at the top of that screen, you can delete your persistent storage. You can rebuild it, things like that. So overall, what we're seeing here is that the system is working much like it has before. Newer version of GNOME, of course, and newer version of Debian. So that's going to bring with it a number of different security fixes and things like that. So that is what it looks like as far as upgrading to Tails 6.0. Again, we're expecting this February 27th based on GNOME 43. And our big unknown right now is, hey, what version of that onion share are we going to get? We get the 2.6 with the new features if they were able to resolve those two critical bugs, or is it something where it's going to keep the 2.2 until they can get that worked out? So there is our latest video there on Tails. I can't wait for the next version to come out. I'll probably be upgrading at least one of my systems to it, testing it out in production before upgrading my other system to it. And hopefully they take care of a few of those little minor bugs. If you like this video, please make sure you share the video far and wide, and subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so, or hey, resubscribe if YouTube unsubscribed you to it. That happens every now and again. And of course, leave us a like and a comment down there. That helps move the video along in the algorithm. Also, let us know what your experience has been using Tails, and do you prefer Tails, Unix, or Cubes? Also, have a look at my Cubes videos if you are interested in seeing that, and I will go ahead and pin one of those to the exit screen here. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.